She came in to talk about her estate plan. She sat down, slid her documents across the table, and then she started to cry. She didn't need a will reviewed. She needed someone to tell her she was going to be okay. My guest today has sat across from that woman more times than he can count. And what he'll tell you is that the financial piece and the emotional piece are never as separate as we think they are. That's exactly why he's here. Stay with me. Welcome to Wings of a Phoenix podcast. I'm your host, Trena Briscoe Matthews, and I help high achieving women, 40 and over, rebuild their lives with intention after divorce. Each episode, I bring you real conversations, honest coaching, and tools to help you rebuild, not just recover. If you are ready to stop just surviving and start leading your own life again, you are exactly where you need to be. The guests I bring onto the show are here for one reason, because they have something my audience needs. Today's guest is no exception. Matt Meredith is an attorney, a certified financial planner, and a tax strategist. And he has built an entire firm around something that should exist but rarely does. One place where the legal, financial, and tax dimensions of your life are handled together, not in three separate offices by three people who never talk to one another. He is the founder of Meridian Legal Advisors, where he specializes in estate planning, asset protection, and tax strategy. He has over 15 years of experience, and before building Meridian, he held leadership roles at JP Morgan Securities and Capital One Investing. What makes him uniquely suited to this audience is not just what he knows, but what he has witnessed. He has sat across from women navigating divorce and seen firsthand the gap between what the legal process produces and what a woman's life actually needs. Please welcome Matt Meredith.
Well, thank you, Trina. What an introduction.
Happy to have you here. So, Matt, you are an attorney and a certified financial planner, and that's a rare combination. Most people have to choose one lane. What made you decide to build a practice that holds both?
Well, it actually started on the financial side. 20 years in the investment management equities world, was a trader, got into advising, and a couple years after I had been advising, I started realizing there's a lot wrong with this industry. And a lot of it was people would come to me, they would have issues that were tax or issues that were law, and I'd send them off to a referral partner. So they'd go see a CPA, they'd go see an attorney. And the problem would be is that nobody talked to each other. Nobody wanted to meet with the client together. So the client would get advice on one end that didn't match the legal end. So everything was mismatched, misaligned. And then the client was sitting there paying all these different people who wouldn't even talk with each other. And finally I said, this isn't working. How do I fix this? Now the fix was a simple thought. It was, oh, let's just go to law school. And so that became the
It's so
fix.
easy. Such an easy fix
Yeah.
there. Excellent. So I think you kind of answered my next question too. You founded Meridian specifically to bring legal, tax, and financial planning under one roof. And you were solving, I think, for the problem of people miscommunicating or not communicating at all. Is that correct?
In a certain manner, that was the original idea. The overall desire, what I wanted to build, was that one-stop shop where you would come in for financial needs, tax needs, estate planning, business, and you didn't have to go see all these different people. You came to see us at Meridian, and we sat with you. We analyzed everything as all these separate professionals now working together. And I always joke, I'll sit here, sip my coffee, and eat a kolache with my CPA as we sit there and talk about the client's needs. And this is the first time for a lot of clients that this has ever happened, right? Even when I was a financial advisor, there was maybe twice out of 15 years of advising on the financial side that I ever actually sat with another attorney as the financial side. And so for the
Wow.
client, it's like, oh, wow, all these people are here together for me.
Right. Excellent. Was there a specific client moment that kind of crystallized that for you where you just said, okay, this is enough. We can't keep going like this?
Yes, it wasn't just one in
Oh,
particular
okay.
client. I kept getting told by the higher ups, "Hey, you're not a CPA. Don't give tax advice." I
Oh,
knew the
okay.
answer, but that was a response. And with legal things, I would read a trust and say, "Your trust isn't working here." And they said, "Well, you're not an attorney." And at that point, like the fourth time, I said, "Okay, here, hold my Topo Chico. I'll be back."
Let me go get that law degree.
Yeah. So now I can do them all.
Excellent, excellent. So when it comes to estate planning, you said your approach goes beyond cookie cutter plans that stop at the surface. So what does a surface level plan miss that could actually hurt someone?
So a lot of estate planning is forms based. And
Mhm.
with that, it works on simple levels. And I never complain about the simple level estate plan. It's easy, it's quick, we'll knock it out. But it doesn't work when you have more assets. When you start becoming more complex, you own businesses, you have more complex distributions, you're married twice now. So you have that
Mhm.
blended family. Simple cookie cutter doesn't work any longer. So you need an estate plan that's tailored to you. One of the biggest things I see all the time is somebody owns a successful business and they haven't done anything to connect it to their estate plan. And so when they die, what happens is that business comes to a halt because there's nobody who can step in. The bank accounts all become frozen. The employees stop getting paid and now everything basically goes down. And I always joke that it's okay if, this is the way you end. Congratulations, you built this big, great business. But what happens if you don't die? What if you wake up 3 years later and now you wake up, I'm alive,
Right.
and now your business is
And I would wonder too how that would work with couples who are
Mhm,
divorced and
correct.
have their own business. And I would think
It,
that's rather complex and would need to
Well, and what you see
work
more
out.
often is the business was built with two people, and now there's just one person, but the business never updated itself. So you still have operating agreements, bylaws that are all two people. And
Right,
so when something happens, it's the phone call to the ex saying, "Hey, you're in control of all of this now." And the ex is sitting there saying, "Oh no, we divorced years ago."
right.
Well, the operating agreement says you're in control now. And
Yeah.
so that
Yeah. So it's
that might
important
be
to get all of
an
those things
even worse
updated.
situation. Exactly.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's all part of things because what people see and what I try to teach differently is that we see it in silos. I have my business here, I have my estate plan here, I'll do my taxes here, my finances are over here, but they're not, they're all together. They're all one unit. And
Right.
so when something happens, for example, divorce, it's not just the business and the estate plan that needs to be updated. It's the whole package together to make sure everything flows around evenly.
Right. Exactly. So a lot of women who listen to this show are in their first year or maybe 1 to 3 years post divorce or beyond. From where you sit, what's the most common financial or legal gap you see in that window that nobody warned them about?
I think it's taking on the new role because a lot of times what we see in the industry is you have the two spouses together. One of them usually handles more finances than the other. It's not really
Mm,
competing. It's most times I've seen where you have a married couple and just one person comes in and does things. And then all of a sudden there's a divorce. And not only that, there is now a huge influx of half the assets being distributed evenly that the other spouse now has to know how to handle.
got
And
it.
it becomes this ordeal where, oh, just leave it as it is, no big deal, put it in my name. But that's not the only issue. There's also considerations of, well, what is the real income that's coming in now? You may have been extremely aggressive when you were married because you had two incomes coming, everything was good, but now you're on limited income, you're on limited assets. You may
Mhm.
need to start adjusting how aggressive you are in the market, in the world, and how you're doing things. And people don't really talk about that. It's more, oh, well, you've got a divorce, we'll move your assets over and we'll invest them. And so I
Mhm.
think what I see missing the most is, what is the long-term goal here? What are the plans? Let's have a conversation about where you're going, because where you were going before is no longer the spot. We've now taken a drastic turn, and we
Right.
need to accommodate for this new direction.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And just revisiting your investments at a certain point, you should probably do anyway, because your goals
Multiple
may have
times.
changed, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
your goals may have changed from when you originally set things up. So that makes total sense. I know estate planning is one of the things divorced women usually put off. In your experience, what is actually at risk when they kind of put that at the bottom of the list, the estate planning?
So the estate planning, there's a lot of laws that will prevent certain things from going to the ex-spouse, but there can still be things that get through that. And
Okay.
so we've all heard about the ex that got a massive account because the person died, the decedent never changed the name on the beneficiary designation. Now, that'll make somebody roll over in their grave if it was a nasty divorce. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the things, but also it becomes what happens with everything else, because a lot of time these estate plans now become defective. Why? Because here in Texas, in my wills, there's a termination of marriage clause, meaning that, hey, if I divorce, my ex gets nothing. It can
Okay.
even go further, one step further. So a lot of people will throw that clause in. But what if there was another child? What if your ex-spouse had a child that you really bonded with when you were married? Hey, we're giving everything equally to our kids because they're my child. Well, a
Mhm.
lot of people don't realize this, that that termination clause will take out that child as well. So
Oh,
now you've disinherited not only the spouse, but the child who you've
child.
spent years with, loving as your own child. So a lot of people don't realize that, and it becomes, oh no, no, I still talk to that child. I love that child. I don't want that to happen. And so it's little things like that. It's basically starting over, because your plan was a joint plan.
Right.
It's not a joint anymore. It can still be very similar, but it better be built around just you.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Can you take me through, just kind of walk me through what a complete post-divorce estate plan might look like? Not just a will, but like the full picture, like what all
Sure.
the pieces that's involved.
So a typical estate plan, you have the will. A lot of
Mhm.
people, you'll add the trust as well. And the reason for that is it's not asset protection, it's more control. It's avoidance of probate. So a lot of times you're building out a will that pours everything into the trust. That trust distributes how you want.
Right.
And that can become complex as you want it. But also with this, now we need to update other documents. What happens if you get bunked on the head and you're out cold for a couple of weeks? Who's handling the finances? A lot of times your old documents will have the next agent, but a lot of times that agent is a child or somebody who is younger, because
Okay.
you always assume, hey, my spouse will be here. Well, now it may need to change. It may need to become your best friend who knows your finances a lot more than, say, your 22-year-old son
Right.
or even younger. And so you're updating your medical power. Who makes these medical decisions for you? Who is going to handle your financial decisions for you?
Right.
A lot of times in Texas specifically and other states, we give our agent on our directive to physicians the right to make that choice. It's simple. It's like, hey, keep me alive unless my agent makes that decision. Why? Because it's my spouse and my spouse will know. Well, the next agent under may be a 24-year-old child
Right.
who you're saying, whoa, I don't want my 24-year-old child to make this decision about, let me die, especially if he's about to inherit two, three, $4 million. And
Mhm.
so it becomes,
Yeah.
that's sweet. Not saying anybody's child will do that, but so forth. Another issue that we see comes down to what happens with the outside assets, the
Mhm.
businesses, the things like that, because we all have these outside assets, but now we have a trust in most cases that we want to control those assets. So
Mhm.
before everything went to spouse, and then if spouse not there, it may go to the trust to be distributed. Well,
Right.
now we need to change that because there is no spouse. So maybe we need to make the trust the primary beneficiary of everything. And
Okay.
so that's one of the things you do. Then we start looking at businesses, outside income. What do we have here? Because before, all of the stuff was usually owned in a manner that could have been joint businesses, or it could have
Mhm.
been businesses where your spouse, even though they're not part of this, if something happens to you, steps in. So kind of that emergency management, that all has to be updated. And then we've got to make sure that that business comes into the trust because, again, if you get bonked on the head or you pass away, you need somebody able to run this thing without having to go to probate first. Probate, I do probate. It can take 3 to 6 months. How many businesses are going to survive 3 to 6 months with
Right.
no
With no
activity?
one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And so you're building that type of stuff up. And then we jump over to taxes.
Mhm.
Taxes have changed now. You used to have joint filings, now you're single. We need to look at what are we paying in taxes? How do we adjust this? And then finally we get over to what we call the financial side, where hey, let's look at how you're invested. Let's look at how everything is working. What are your plans? What are your goals? And build that out. And then my favorite part always comes down to let's protect the assets. I love
Mhm.
building out asset protection structures so that if something happens to you, your assets aren't taken in judgments and things like that. And so it's that whole financial circle
Right.
package that we go through all the way around.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and all of that is critically important, and people don't necessarily think about that. And I'm sure there needs to be other provisions. If you say if your children are not over 18, I'm sure we can't have 17-year-olds
No,
in charge of
no.
these things. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and even more importantly, I always say this to clients, we don't give children money. And I don't mean, 17. They're not getting the money anyways. That'll have a guardianship on it. But 18 to 25,
25.
sometimes even 35, we don't give them money. And I always tell this story that I went to LSU, grew up in Louisiana, so party school, everything was rocking. Met this guy. Unfortunately, his father had passed,
Mhm.
left him $500,000 at the
Wow.
age of, I think, 20, 21 or so. And within a couple of years, I ran into him again. No more money
Wow.
and rehab, and was hardcore in rehab. That's why we don't give money. We pick somebody who can now come in and guide our children instead of say, here you go, congratulations.
Right. Right. Okay. Makes total sense. So now, Matt, I want to ask you something you shared with me before we started recording, because I think every woman listening to the show needs to hear this. You work with a lot of clients who come in for financial or legal advice, but what actually ends up happening in that room, especially when the client is a woman who's going through or coming out of a divorce?
To put it lightly, there's a lot of tears that are shed. There's a lot of anger that comes out. There is a lot of that feeling of I've worked so hard and now I'm all the way back at the starting line. And that is from, I joke, and you probably heard me, from a Capricorn's viewpoint, like, whoa, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the reality of it. Divorce is not pretty.
Right.
Sometimes you get that, all right, we've agreed, we're separating. But then something happens. Then it becomes, well, I know we were just going to sign this and go on our ways, but now he has a lawyer or I've gotten a lawyer. So now it
Mm-hmm.
starts getting messy and then it becomes this nightmare. And then there's the emotional aspect besides the arguing. It's the emotional aspects of I've been told multiple times by women, I feel like I failed.
Mm,
And that is a terrible aspect to be in life in general, but more so when you're trying to handle your future thought process.
yes.
Where am I going to be in 5 years? If your thought is, who cares? Like, this is terrible, who cares? Then it becomes a lot harder to plan and to do what's right because you're going through an emotional state. I'd even call it depression. And the real issue becomes we need to work now on the emotional aspects.
Mhm.
But I can't put my therapist hat on because I
Right.
don't have the therapy. So it really becomes, and why I like you, Trina, so much is that that's a lot of what you do. And so before they ever get to me, and the ones who have post-divorce coaches, it's a
Mhm.
whole different ordeal. It's that positive, I'm starting over, this is going
Right.
to be great mentality versus all is lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Because one of the things I think is really important for most, all of my clients are women, but one of the things really important for them is to make decisions, any decision about their next chapter. Let's make it based on facts and not emotion.
Correct.
And in order for us to do that, then we've got to level set where we are emotionally because you just come through this traumatic event and your nervous system is all over the place. So that is definitely important. And also, I think too, when it comes to finances, there is a lot of emotional triggers just around finances in general. And then I think women in particular have to also overcome any kind of negative stigma that's attached to that, because we get a lot of messages that say women aren't great with finances or women, you know, can't do this or can't do that, which is complete BS. But nonetheless, those messages are out there and some people have internalized that. So we've got to kind of reteach and relearn that and just get really comfortable with that. So, um, what do you wish more professionals in your field understood about that emotional divorcee who's coming in to seek, counsel?
I think the way the industry is, and one of the problems I always saw with it was that it's still segmented.
Mm,
So for this divorcee, you're walking in to see a financial advisor. You're walking over to your attorney. You're walking over to your CPA tax guy. You may do other business attorney stuff, and you're having to say it all over again. You're
oh,
having to
yeah.
relive it all over again with people who may not care as much as others.
Mhm.
And so it's this continuous beat down of a situation, and no wonder nobody wants to do it.
Right.
And that's what kind of has always separated me was because I can do all those things. So it's just one conversation. And
Yeah.
that has made it a lot easier. And I'll actually, my problem is I'll get into it. Like, yeah, tell me more. What happened? Oh, that's terrible. And I think the main ordeal is find people that you're comfortable with
Yeah.
because no, you're not going to share your life story with the financial advisor at the local place. You're not going to do that. And you shouldn't do that. And again, it kind of comes back to with you is you need to have that understanding of what is this goal. You're not going seeing that advisor and let out all your emotions because the advisor can take that multiple ways. And you don't want to give a sign that basically says, whatever you want to do, do. You want to know
True.
what your goal is because you're now in charge of this. And so for a lot of it is make sure you're finding solid people you can work with and make sure that you're able to, for a moment, put aside the emotional aspects of it and get the business done.
Hmm. And we know that divorce takes a team, right? Like you mentioned, and it's not just one advisor or one coach um, that is really needed in this process. But I guess, can you speak to what happens when one of those people is missing? So if they have all the, everyone has a lawyer for the most part, right? So they have a lawyer, um, and maybe they have a financial advisor, but they don't have a coach, or they have a coach and a lawyer, but they don't have the financial piece. I mean, like what's the risk of any one of those people not being part of the equation for the client?
Well, let's talk about this team because a lot of times your lawyer is the person who did your divorce. And do you want the family law running financial sides? That becomes a main question there. And you probably hate your lawyer at this point. Let's be honest.
Hopefully
It
not,
costs
but
me how much? So it becomes find the type of lawyer that you need that's correct for the situation. People ask me all the time to do things, and I always say I'm not that type of lawyer. Sorry. I pictured the movie Michael with John Travolta, and he's like, do this. He's like, I'm not that type of angel. That's my response as well. And so you need people who can really lead you on because this is what they do. A lot of times your financial guy is probably the same financial guy starting out who still managed both you and your spouse.
Mhm.
Really want to be with that same financial guy. For me, it's, I don't know if I would stick around. I would go the separate route, but that's just in my opinion. So it becomes find the financial guy that you're wanting. And this isn't always the easiest task. You need to be patient with it. You and I have mentioned in the past that, the average advisor here in Texas is 65 years old. And then the next one is usually in the industry for 5 years or less.
Right.
So to me, a lot of the thought becomes so you're either getting, heavily men in the industry. So you're either getting your father or you're getting your son as a financial advisor. Is that what you want?
Right.
Probably not. You probably want somebody who's close to your age, understands it,
Yeah.
has their own money invested, and is able to help advise. I feel that's the same way with the legal side as well. Find somebody you're comfortable with on the same level and build out from that. Again, I I love what you do. You need a coach. You need help going through the emotional aspects because you don't want to walk into the business type meetings and start off with emotional aspects. You want to be prepared to, hey, this is the route I'm going. I need your help doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And then again, taxes, things like that, it takes time to find somebody who understands your industry, your business, your things like that. And I always joke with people because taxes, as a tax attorney, it always comes eventually like, hey, you've done my estate plan, you've built out my business, you've looked at my finances, will you do my taxes? And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Because
Yeah.
the tax aspect is kind of it's the least exciting, but when you're good at it, it's like exactly. And so for a lot of my clients, it's that one person swinging around in all roles,
Right.
and you understand, because you have had that conversation, and it may have gotten emotional at one point in time, but you didn't start the relationship on sobbing, crying, I don't know what to do. It's you've had the coaching, you've had the helping.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I think we talked about too is while I'm sure you're very compassionate and gentle with these women as they come in, um, but you know, you are actually there to, or your expertise lies in a different area. And so, while that's important, we also want to make sure we're using our time wisely and that, your time is spent in your lane of expertise. So, um,
Well, and to add to that, I am happy to discuss that with you, but there is a clock.
right.
And
There is a
so
clock. Yeah,
save
exactly.
the hourly rate and
Exactly, exactly. So divorced women often tell me that they feel financially exposed in a way that they didn't before, especially when they built things together and then now they're kind of standing alone with it. So what does real asset protection look like, and when should they start really thinking about that?
so I get that question a lot. and it's from everybody. When should I start worrying about protecting my assets?
Mm-hmm.
And my response is always the same: when you're afraid of losing it, or when
Mm-hmm.
you've worked hard enough that you don't want to lose it. Now, if you come to me and say, I've got $25,000 in a brokerage account, I don't want anybody to touch it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably tell you, well, my fee will be more than your account because I'm going to have to build a lot of things out for this. And
Right.
so it doesn't make sense at that point. But a
Right.
lot of times we find with divorce men and women that it becomes new jobs have to be found. A lot of times, somebody who may have stayed home as a homemaker now has to
Right.
go out and work, and they start making income. And then it becomes, hey, I want to protect what I'm building, or I want to buy rental properties. I want to buy
Right.
assets. And at that point, it becomes structure it correctly. Because if something happens, all this stuff that you've built, all this stuff that you've worked for in building since the divorce on your own is now one lawsuit away from somebody coming in and
And
saying,
trying
hey,
to take it.
you did something wrong. We're suing you. And again, asset protection isn't going to stop the lawsuits. What it does is it makes it much harder for people to reach in and grab it. So much to the
Right.
point that it may become, all right, let's just settle because I'm never going to get paid through this structure.
Got it.
And so that's what you're doing. I think the main thing with the asset protection is there becomes a point where you sit back and say, hey, I want to make sure that either I get this money or my children or family gets this money and it's worth protecting.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So I'm going to move to tax strategy. I know that's a part of what you do, and it's one of the areas where divorced women get the most unpleasant surprises. So, what is one tax move post-divorce that most women don't know they have access to?
So tax strategy is a little bit different than accounting. Tax strategy, we're looking for ways to save money. We're
Mm-hmm.
looking at ways to use depreciation type plays or charitable plays so that we lower that adjusted gross
Mm-hmm.
income so we pay less money. Um, with tax, I think a lot of the things become if you weren't working before and now you're working, all of a sudden you're paying taxes.
Mm-hmm.
If you were working and so was your spouse, now you have less income, but it still feels like, hey, I'm paying the same amount of taxes. So how do you adjust that? I think for a lot of people, it starts with do a full review. Find a CPA who, or even a tax professional who isn't just an accountant, who isn't just looking back at your return and saying, oh,
Mm-hmm.
we can do stuff. Have a full analyzation of everything you have so that you can see where the gaps are. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people just, here's my W-2s, here's my 1099s, what's my tax? Because once somebody looks into it, now we can calculate, hey, you can save money by putting more into this type of account for retirement account, something like that. Once you start making more money, though, you're paying over $20,000 a year in taxes. That's when strategy starts kicking in.
Okay.
Because with strategy, the difference between accounting and strategy is that we're looking forward now. So
Mm-hmm.
strategy, I'm looking forward and I'm saying, I may have a tax issue. How do I lower it? What people don't understand with strategy is it's not like this magical, I flip a switch and boom, all of a sudden you pay less taxes. No, what you're doing is you're allocating your money into another type of play. So instead of giving the government $100,000, you're moving $100,000 or however much to make that equivalent into another asset type. And so real estate, oil and gas plays, depreciation type things where now you're lowering your AGI, saving money on taxes, but you also own the asset now. And
Right.
so you're doing this every year to save money. And so instead of just giving that money out, you're building your portfolio. You're building out all these different types of things that now go towards retirement that you get versus having to pay. Comes the ordeal. At first, when you're starting off, if you're not paying over 20,000, it really becomes okay. How do we maximize what we do make to save? Once you're over 20,000, it becomes the phone call is always the same. I'm tired of paying taxes, Matt, do something. And that's like, who are you?
Makes sense. Makes sense. I'm sure you've seen plans that work beautifully on paper fall apart in practice. What makes the difference between a plan that holds up and one that doesn't?
I think sitting in probate court will teach you the difference. One things I see all the time is a plan that is what mom wanted.
Mm,
And by that, I mean, our two children, she has two children, they never got along once.
hmm.
And now they are in charge together to distribute an estate. Another thing I see all the time is there's two or three children. We're going to give it to my middle child. Oh my God, he's the light of the world. He owns a job, a company, he's married, has three kids. He can figure this out in no time. Well, the problem is he has a job, he's married, he has three kids, and when's he going to have the time? And so what
Right.
happens? One of the other children start complaining. Another child steps in and says, "You're taking too long." And then they start arguing over things because it's as though, "Hey, you're not doing anything." So it's the realistic aspects of the world that come into play that people don't talk about. And I've
Hmm.
seen it all the time. Attorneys just say, "Give me who you want and we'll go." Versus why this child, or why both of them,
Hmm.
how well do they get along, things like that. Another thing I see all the time is, hey, we created this trust, we paid all the money, and we never moved anything into it.
Oh,
And so now guess what, we're going to probate, and we're going to have to spend all this money for a probate attorney to come in and actually do the probate. It's the little things that they look good on paper. And I've seen some trusts that are just like, wow, who did this trust? This is phenomenal. What's
hmm.
in it? Oh, well, nothing's in it. I haven't moved anything in it yet. And so you've got all these properties, you've got all this stuff that is now controlled by the will. Well, the
Hmm.
will is just going to give everything flat out. And so that little child you have, now you've got a problem because you can't give a child under 18 money. You
Right.
have another child who may have problems. He may have addiction problems. You might have an older child that is going through a divorce. You have all these real life scenarios that you can't just give that money away because it may not go where you think it's going. And
Right.
so it's really examining it from a different point of view. And this is the thing with estate planning. Everybody thinks of it as death. Oh, I don't want to think about death. My own wife, I'm an estate planning attorney. I can
Right.
draft some crazy stuff. And you know how much it cost me? Nothing.
Right. Right.
But we didn't want to do our will and estate plan for years. And finally, I told her, I'm like, look, this is embarrassing. If I die, everybody's going to be like, look, he's an estate planner. He didn't even have a will. Let's use him
Right.
as an
Right.
example.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
finally, we made ourselves sit down and discuss what's going to happen. And that's the uncomfortable aspects. But estate planning isn't really about death. It's about making sure that what you've worked for carries on.
Right.
I don't even like using the word legacy because that sounds too much like death. Instead, I give the biggest one. What if you go into a coma? What
Mhm.
if, death's not the worst thing? Incapacity is. What happens if you wake up 4 years later and you realize everything I worked for is gone and now I have to start all over again?
Right.
That to me is worse than death. And so it's really sit down, handle it, and just get it over with. But
Yeah.
do it in a manner that somebody talks to you about it and really plans it versus, here's what I want. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think you have to, kind of real life proof it. Or, I mean, and especially once you're to a point where you are divorced, because that estate plan that you put together as a couple is going to be very different now. And
Yeah.
so you kind of have to test proof it and make sure this makes sense and all of that. So that sounds great. I know those things are critical and we all need to pay attention to that. Let me ask you this. If a woman listening today is in her first year post-divorce and she has a divorce decree, she thinks the legal piece is done, what is the one thing you would tell her to look at first?
Okay. So in this situation, the divorce is over. We've now had assets moved. I think the first place that is a good start is what happens if I go? Who are my beneficiaries? Who's protecting me? Not if I go, but again, if I have incapacity. This
Mhm.
needs to start over because the person you had picked is no longer there. The
Right.
person who before we all assume has my greatest interest there is no longer there. Do I want my next person, typically a child, to step in or do it? Or do I want to go find a friend or a family member who may have a better understanding of what happens at this age? Does a younger child, and not by young, I mean in their 20s, understand like how much you want to survive when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s? That you might want to get somebody who's older who can step in that role where your spouse used to be. Once you finish that aspect, or even at the same time, it starts becoming, what about your business? Where's your income coming from? How are you managing your life going forward? Do things need to change? If you're a business owner, has this changed? Worst case scenario, you at least need to move your business into your trust so that if something does happen to you, your trustee can run. And then again, from that point, you start looking at the asset protection, the taxes, the financial planning. All of these kind of spread out, but I always say the most important thing is what happens if I get hit by a car tomorrow?
Right.
And then what happens if I survive, but I'm impaired? And from there, you just build up.
Excellent, excellent. So start with the beneficiaries and then everything else will you would handle after, but that's a good place to start. So that sounds good. Matt, where can people find you and learn more about Meridian?
So I am all over the web. Um, Astonishingly, the best way to reach me is through the website meridianlg.com, and that's meridianlg.com. We have Facebook page, LinkedIn pages. I'm on Instagram. I even have a TikTok, but I can't figure out how and why it won't post. But YouTube. So you can always reach us there. Email is matt@meridianlg.com. And from there, reach out. We serve on the legal side. It's usually Texas, heavy Texas,
Mhm.
depending on the type of legal need. Some things can be nationwide if it's federal, things like that. Taxes are all federal. We can help you in any state. Financial planning, the same type of thing. And asset protection, we can build out for you based on your needs.
Excellent, excellent. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me today. What you do is so important, and the women in this community needed to hear that today. So thanks again. And if this conversation opened your eyes to something you've been putting off, that's the point. Awareness is the first step. So action is the second. And I have two resources to help you take the second step right now. So first, join me on June 30th for a free virtual event. It's called Starting Over Smart, the financial moves that matter most for post-divorce women. And we're going to go deep on exactly the moves that your future self will thank you for. The registration link is in the show notes, so just go grab your spot now. And secondly, grab your free post-divorce financial checklist. It's the 12 things every woman should review before year one is over. And that's waiting for you now at free.silverlinepublishing.cloud/checklist. The link will also be in the show notes. So until next time, this is your season to rise.